I'm Golda. Today we are honored to have Jeremy Gray, the Senior Vice President of a leading private wealth international company based in Singapore. So hi Jeremy, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate that you take a time off to join us for this interview. And let's get started. Right, so Jeremy, you started off working in a global FMCG company in your early years. Is there any connection with the education you took up?
Yes and no, actually. I was lucky enough actually to get a job at a company which is fairly well known, Procter & Gamble, at their global headquarters, even though I didn't have a degree. And I did realize very fast that without a degree, I would hit a wall at some point. So I decided to do my studies on top of working full-time and took on my studies on top. So basically I would go to university every evening and be studying from 6 to sort of 10, 11, and then on Saturdays as well, and studying for those courses during all my free time. Why did I choose that? Not specifically, actually. My thing was maths, but somehow somebody had convinced me that if I studied maths, I would end up becoming a maths teacher. That kind of didn't fly very well in my mind, so somehow I went on to do business. Nothing really to do with actually what I was doing at P&G. It's just that business seemed like the natural thing to do. Actually, a fairly boring degree for me, but it was a degree like any other, and I did that while I was working. The international finance was just a major. I really done nothing specific.
Alright, so after working in Switzerland for a period of time, how do you manage to get an overseas posting?
Well, I didn't really get an overseas posting per se. Basically, my responsibilities were very regional, and when I was a headhunter covering financial markets, I was basically hunting interdealer brokers across all the financial capitals. So they were working out of places like London, obviously, but also Paris, Frankfurt, Luxembourg, and Geneva, Zurich, etc. So I was covering all of those areas, but basically physically staying in the same place. With a phone, you can reach pretty much any destination. So I was on the phone all the day covering all these different areas. I had colleagues who were covering Dubai, Hong Kong. That was a bit more challenging. And I even had, at one point, in a different position when I was working out of the UK, colleagues covering Singapore. So they would start very, very early in the morning, me too, but they managed to start just a bit earlier than me. On the phone at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah, because obviously Singapore would be and they would be basically calling into Singapore at that time. And I was at the time covering Switzerland and so that. And the thing about Swiss people is they get up very early in the morning. So if they get up at 7, you're an hour early. You also have to be up at 6 to be talking to them. Yeah, but actually, especially the more senior they are, the earlier they get up.
So on average, how many hours have you been working throughout the day?
A normal day would be minimum 12 hours.
More, right? Just work through the whole day.
Yeah, well, it depends on the job. Huh? Some jobs actually have got a bit more of a break, but usually, usually be a good 12 hours. Start at 9, finish at 9, start at 7, finish at 7, depends.
So you mentioned that you hold several appointments. So is it considered a breakthrough for you?
No. Look, remember that more or less 10 years ago there was a global financial crisis that hit most of the world, not so much on this side of the world, but still a little bit, but the United States and Europe were hit pretty bad. And that kind of really got me to focus on being a headhunter. The idea was really that if I'm going to have to find a job, better be the guy that finds the job for other people. And that kind of sort of brought me into that, and that ultimately is what led me to Singapore. The will also to work out of a big city. Living in Europe, London tends to be the easy big city to go and work out of. And living in Switzerland, you would normally have a very Swiss sort of view of things, which would encompass the languages of French and German, which I do speak both fluently. But I just felt like I wanted to work out of another place. Dubai was the up-and-coming, big, trendy place to look at, which is why I started looking originally, but somehow ended up in Singapore.
Ooh. How do you find working in Luxembourg?
Well, I never actually worked per se in Luxembourg, but I did cover Luxembourg. Not too different from Switzerland, maybe a little bit more, smaller of a market. Very conservative. Not much to say about Luxembourg, really.
Any difference in the working cultures?
Not so different, no. I mean, it's more difficult to find people who actually want to go and live there. So if you're looking for, if you're actually looking for, let's say, a broker covering something very specific, which means he has to have that kind of experience and the languages and has to want to physically go and work out of Luxembourg, which can be very advantageous in certain ways. Taxes, very, very good, employee benefits, obviously, and so on. But somebody has to really want to go and live in that little place called Luxembourg, which, is one of the smallest countries in the world, smaller than Singapore, because there's a lot. And no, really. So that had its challenges, but not more than that. I didn't actually physically go to Luxembourg and sit there and work out of Luxembourg. There was no need for that.
After all these years working overseas, so do you kind of miss home? I'm just curious.
That's a good point. What is home? The thing is, I've kind of always been an expat wherever I lived. Even as a child in Switzerland, I was a PR and actually never became Swiss. I was asked at the age, I think, of 12, 10, 12, I can't remember, do you want to become Swiss? But usually the question is asked more like, do you want to go to the army? No. So you don't want to become Swiss? Yes, no. You kind of, and by the time you realize, I was British, so I inherited the British nationality from my father, which was cool at the time because we were European. The European Union had just been voted in, and of course, originally everybody thought the European Union would be one big country, strong, that could, sort of counterbalance the power of America. So we were going to be the new America. That was kind of the view that we had of it. That was really the ideal of the European Union originally. Switzerland refused categorically to become a member for just basically to protect their banking secrecy. That didn't work out very well for them, ultimately anyway. But so it didn't make any sense to me at the time. So the irony today, though, is that, I'm not Swiss nor European after Brexit.
Right, so that's interesting. Because I also noticed that you co-founded a non-profit association while working as a headhunter. I mean, what triggers you to do that? Is something different from what you're doing?
No, that's slightly, well, first of all, I started that when I was still at Procter & Gamble. And what triggered that simply is I also grew up my first years in Africa, in Nigeria, with a father who was an entrepreneur, who was doing business at the time in Africa. Somehow I met my then partner, who was also Nigerian, going out in the evening, completely randomly, and we started off by creating a non-profit association simply because we were in Switzerland, which, especially in Geneva, which sees United Nations, all the NGOs around the United Nations, including Red Cross, but including the UNHCR and all these other NGOs, notwithstanding 40 multinational companies that have their headquarters in this small city, which has the size of Singapore, but only 250,000 people living there. And of course, it felt like we were in the right place to do that. And this was more or less when Tony Blair was being re-elected and was using Africa prosperity as one of his main arguments. So we saw this as a trend, something to bank on. And funnily enough, we reached out to Tony Blair's Commission for Africa and to others, and basically they received us extremely well. We basically said we want to organize a pre-G8 conference. So you remember that G8 is basically the meeting of the 8 most powerful men in the world, but at the time it was organized by the UK, so Tony Blair was the man who was organising the G8, and it was going to be in a place in Scotland called Gleneagles, which is basically a very famous castle and golf place. But essentially speaking, before that, all of the African representatives were meeting in the UK, so we wanted to do a pre-G8, and we were asking for their support, and they gave us, of course, their support. Oh, why not? It's free. Support is free.
Wow.
So all of a sudden we had Tony Blair next to our name on the invitations, and of course everybody showed up. We were a little bit surprised by the success of that, and the next thing we knew, we were invited to the UK for the G8. Anyway, long story short, it was a lot of fun, and that kind of then drew me into business ideas and so on. It was really with that in mind that we created a non-profit association, but we wanted to foster relationships between Africa and Switzerland, and that's kind of what happened. It was quite interesting it was my first exposure to politics, to be sitting next to ministers and presidents and so on. And so I was a bit too young, I would say, at the time to really be able to bounce onto that. Nowadays things have changed quite a bit, and I'm still very much exposed to that in different roles, because I'm still very much involved into charities and into Africa and so on. So amongst other places, and so I actually now have learned how to talk to politicians, to ambassadors and so on, which is a completely different way of addressing someone. When you're in your 20s and you're there all of a sudden, you have absolutely no idea that, oh, Your Excellency, so those things are not a given, you have to learn.
Right. So you mentioned about charities,
Mm-hmm.
and nowadays there's a lot of different forms of ways of doing charity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in your view, what kind of charity there's?
Every charity is valid.
Good.
Any charity is good. I think everybody should do something for others, either one way or another. I was always brought up to give 10% of anything that you earn at a very minimum to sort of give to others. Always remember that others are not as lucky as you, and usually start with your backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Once you try to go and help the children of God knows what country, start with the children who are really hungry and are just behind your house. You'll be surprised how many there are. And that I would say is very important. Here, I mean, I'm a member of one of the Rotary Clubs of Singapore, the Rotary Club of Singapore West, now since 4 or 5 years already. A lot of things that I've done through the Rotary emblem, helping people all around here, both different themes, but also really from helping children through university here to helping people with different sicknesses or whatever. I mean, there's so much which is done. We're one of, I think, 70 different clubs in Singapore. Singapore is one of the most active Rotary locations in the region. And I'm also, I sit on the board of directors of a PT Ltd here in Singapore that is solely dedicated to charity, which is registered in Europe, and which basically funds, manages and monitors very large capital-intensive projects in emerging economies, usually assisting governments with their nation-building programs. So we're looking at things like infrastructure, but also energy and renewables, and drink water, and sanitation, and education, and so on. And basically with the aim to make charity unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a beautiful mission and vision that they have, and all that is around education. If you want to help a country sustain itself, start by teaching the young ones how to be the entrepreneurs of tomorrow, and that's kind of the whole idea. Mm-hmm. It's pretty fascinating, actually, to be honest.
Yeah. How do you find wealth management in Singapore?
That's an interesting question. Well, I obviously enjoy it from that perspective. I've been here now for 10 years, so definitely, and I think out of those 10 years, 9 years in wealth management in Singapore. It's changed quite a bit over the years. I think it's morphed more and more into what I would call a mature market, resembling more certain of the larger European or North American markets, which are more fee-based, and that's a good thing for the clients themselves. Obviously, that the advice is more on point. It's more cost-effective for them, and obviously it's just better advice altogether. The platforms are changing. The propositions from the wealth management companies are getting better. Those who are slightly more in advance than others, but we're getting there, I think. And obviously the one that I've been working for has been on the forefront of all of that, and boasts that they have already their own platforms, their own systems, and so on, and which is obviously taking the whole industry into a different direction. From that perspective, I think things are good. So you look at other jurisdictions are also making their moves. And here MAS has been very, very good at directing the industry in the right way, and it's good. It weeds out those that are a bit less on point, and also when markets are a bit more challenging, like during COVID and others, and you very fast will see those who are not really doing the right thing are the first to leave. It leaves only the ones that matter behind, which is good.
Right. Imagine today I'm like your potential prospect client. So what can you do with my money?
Oof. Well, look.
I'd love to have some advice from you.
Well, you can always come and see me. We're more than happy to help you out. As an advisor, I would always, I would say 99% of the time when possible, direct any prospect. If you're already a prospect, that's fantastic. A prospect, we name a prospect somebody who's already interested to do something. But if that is really the case, we'll look at covering the whole spectrum of your financial situation, and that would include everything from making sure that you and your family, also if you run a company, that everyone is first covered in terms of insurance and protecting you with the aim of looking at, before we're going to build a big house, make sure that the foundations are very solid. And then from there we would look at what you're doing to save for the future, for yourself, for your children, for their education, all the way through to the money that you have sitting on the side, which is possibly just sitting in cash. What's the right thing to do to ensure that you counter the effect of inflation, plus obviously making an income, so that over time you would have more money than you would have sitting around. If you just leave your money sitting around in cash, you will be losing buying value over time. That's the unfortunate thing. Inflation scratches a little bit of your money every single year, even though it's not a big amount nowadays. It's already 2.5–3% globally. That means that your money loses 50% of its value every 15 to 20 years. It used to be 20, it's coming closer to 15 now. That's a lot of money to lose. So say you had $100,000 sitting around. If you don't invest that money and at least beat the value of inflation plus a bit more, effectively speaking, you would end up with 50,000 in buying power 15 to 20 years down.
I mean, what are the advice?
Specifically? What would you?
I mean, in general.
There's so many different things. I mean, people always want to buy property for themselves and so on. So there's things that you can look at. Into that, there's obviously ways to invest into the market.
So it's more like customized approach.
Absolutely, every single person has an approach which has to be, directed to who they are, what their goals are, their objectives, what they can achieve, what they can buy. I mean, people sometimes don't save any money until they're well into their, let's say, 40s, and come and say, right, I'd love to retire at 55. So how? And you're like, nope, not going to be possible, because, effectively speaking, you would have to save so much of your income, which is pretty much impossible. So now let's look at what you can do to achieve something which, let's say, is more in line with the expectations that you should have. Some people are fantastic. I've been very impressed by some who are, still in their 20s. They're already putting so much aside, very, very set on their objectives, and even in certain cases so much so that I just wanted to say, hey, give them a bit of a shake and say, go out and get drunk, for like calling friends, for crying out loud.
Right.
Stop putting all your money into your future. It's also normal to actually be a bit like everyone else as well. But of course, I would strongly advise anyone to start saving money very young. And there are many ways of doing that, in an effective manner.
So is there like an investment framework that you use? Would you be able to share in front of the camera?
Investment framework?
Yeah.
Not specifically, no. There is no investment framework. There are, obviously, I do manage a portfolio which is used across the different clients. Those who come with certain needs and so on. I won't go into the details of that. I would just say that there are ways to invest into the markets which are actually profitable. And I'm talking about simple things, but it demands usually that people might be accredited investors. So for those who don't know, an accredited investor in Singapore have to earn more than $300,000 a year and so on. But for the others, I mean, there are still lots of ways to invest and lots of ways to achieve appreciation of their investments. And then of course a lot of people come and talk to me about buying property. I would just say one thing: if you're a Singaporean living in Singapore looking to buy property, that's a fantastic thing. I would very much advise you to go and buy property. You'll have lots of help from the state to do so, and it will gain value, and it's a very good thing. If you're not from Singapore looking to buy property, I would say make sure that you plan to stay here a very long time. The big mistake that I see from a lot of international investors is that they think they have to buy property immediately, and the next thing that happens, they're leaving the country to go do something else. The property doesn't follow them, the property stays here. And they still have to maintain it, manage it, and make sure that it continues to generate income. In many situations, it becomes a burden. So you should be careful. If you're actually prone to have a very international career, buying immediately a property might not be the right thing for you, because you'll end up being a burden, something that you can't manage from offshore, or that you can't actually leave, because when you want to leave, because you still have that property to take care of, either to sell or to rent out or whatever, and it might not be the right time. The market might be in a slight downturn. You might end up with something that ends up being a heavy burden in terms of cost that you can't actually liquidate fast enough to move on to go to work out of another place. So I would from that perspective, I'd say maybe be a bit more careful. Otherwise, if you really want to know how to invest your money, come and see me.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us today. Happy to have you. I wish you all the best for your future endeavors. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I see you the next time. Goodbye.